So hello everyone, and thank you for joining the second of our SRUC alumni bigger picture interviews. Traps, maps and apps, practical digital devices to measure natural capital. I'm Bridget Edmonston and I'm the Alumni Relations Manager, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to tonight's live interview with our special guest, Dr Hannah Rudman. Hannah's role with SRUC is as co-director of the Thriving Natural Capital Challenge Centre, and her work focuses on how digital and data innovations can help the natural economy sector address the grand challenges we face: climate change and loss of biodiversity. Hannah is also convener of TrustableCredit.com, an adhocracy creating international open standardised processes for digital devices and their data, measuring carbon, biodiversity and nature improvements. She's on the executive management team of Agrimetrics, a UK agri-tech centre, and is an expert advisor to the European Commission's research agency. Hannah also serves as a board trustee and director for the National Galleries of Scotland. So we're delighted to have you join us live tonight, but for those of you who want to tune in again, a recording will be made available on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days. So let's get back to tonight's event. Our interview is going to last approximately 30 to 40 minutes. Hannah's going to chat through her slides. We've got a fantastic video for you to watch, and we're going to get a little interactive tonight with an online Menti poll, but don't worry, Hannah will guide you through that later. So if you've got any questions for Hannah that might come up during the interview, feel free to type these into the online Q&A function and we'll run through your questions at the end of the interview. If you can try and keep your questions as short as possible, we'll try and get through as many of your questions as we can. It's such a fantastic and interesting topic we've got tonight, so I think we'd better just get started now. So good evening, Hannah. It's really lovely to have you here with us tonight. And I guess the first question we have, the first question on everybody's lips is, what actually is natural capital?
Great, thanks Bridget, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Well, it's a really good question actually, and what I wanted to do, as you warned everyone, is gather everyone's opinions about what is natural capital. So can I check that you can see my first slide, which is this Mentimeter poll? Bridget, can you give me thumbs up if you can?
Hannah, we can see it, yes.
Thank you. All right, so if you go to menti.com with another browser, so perhaps if you're watching on a laptop, pick up a phone or an iPad, or just open another browser window and go to menti.com, MENTI.com, and use the code 18125050 to give me your opinions on this topic. What is natural capital? Now, I've given you some options and you can vote for as many options as you wish. Is natural capital the world's stocks of natural assets, geology, soil, air, water, all living things? Perhaps you think it might be a spurious sustainability approach made up by accountants, or maybe you think it's money made from plants. So I can see a few votes coming in already. I hope you can see that as well. I'll give you a few seconds to get set up and begin voting. So menti.com with the code 18125050. All right, no votes for money made from plants yet. I can't tell you if, you know, that's the right answer yet. We'll get to that shortly. Okay, so I think I'll just give us 10 more seconds and then we'll close that vote. It's looking as though there's a favourite answer. And there we go. We'll show the answer with 82% of you agreeing. And this is the Scottish Forum's description of what is natural capital. They describe it as renewable and non-renewable stocks of natural assets, including geology and landscapes, soil, air, water, and all living things, which means species and communities, us, that combine to yield a flow of benefits to people. So natural capital is a concept that enables us to think of our natural environment as an asset that provides ecosystem services beneficial to the wider society and our wider economy. Now, some of these, like food, are in fact private goods because individuals can own and profit from them. And then there are public goods like flood mitigation, and they're available to anyone, and society benefits rather than individuals. Obviously, many businesses rely on natural capital and ecosystem services, and they will invest in nature to protect the private goods that they make and sell. But it's harder to justify getting investment in public goods, which are difficult to value and provide benefits longer term. As a result, we find that most private sector businesses have short-term decisions around investing in natural capital at the expense of those longer-term public benefits. And that leads to some costs to the environment, such as pollution or flooding, that then have to be sorted out by governments. Agricultural production leads to private goods, the harvest, the food for the producer, whilst generating those environmental costs, its carbon footprint. And then funding from either public or private sources has to be offered to encourage more sustainable practices so that the primary benefit comes back to the public over the long term rather than providing those short-term benefits. So Bridget, back to you.
That's great, Hannah, thank you. And following on from that, the next question is, your challenge centre is called Thriving Natural Capital. Why does natural capital need to thrive?
Okay, well, the degradation of natural capital poses some big threats to us, economic, environmental, and social. And the last 100 years of human life and business activity have used the renewable assets, which are part of natural capital, living and non-living things that can regenerate, and also the non-renewable things of natural capital, like fossil fuels and minerals that exist in finite amounts and that we're obviously using to the point of their running out, their extinction. But we can also see from this slide that natural resources are the single most important input to the global economy. And according to the World Economic Forum, more than half of the world's total GDP, gross domestic product, involves activities that are moderately or highly dependent on nature. And they create $44 trillion worth of economic value. But that value usually goes back to private companies. Are they investing their profits back into natural systems to ensure their regeneration so that they can thrive? I think we know the answer to that so far. So nature provides critical societal benefits to individuals and communities around the world, and the right-hand side of this slide talks about that combination of soils and species and habitats and communities and landscapes are ecosystem services that give us food and water, that keep us and other species alive, that help with carbon sequestration and offer protection from soil erosion and flood risk, and provide habitats for wildlife and pollination and spaces for recreation and well-being. So if we can view nature as natural capital, recognizing its true value as a set of assets, then it becomes an economic asset too. And if it's an economic asset that businesses pay fairly for and that public and private organisations invest in to ensure that the natural stocks are not driven below critical thresholds and that the assets can regenerate, we end up in a more healthy scenario. So that notion of thriving natural capital is important because the degradation of it, including the loss of biodiversity and the depletion of those renewable stocks, poses a real risk for businesses. And if we don't do anything, then the costs will be high. In fact, the World Wildlife Fund has calculated that we'd incur a direct cost of $10 trillion globally between 2011 and 2050 if we don't invest in nature. And we need both the public and private sector's investment in nature solutions. So the Thriving Natural Capital Challenge Centre, which I co-direct with Professor Mark Reed, our aim is to support governments and advise on the use of public investment and public policies that encourage responsible private investment in natural capital. And as we've discussed, those both the private and public investment types are required for natural capital to thrive. We've obviously seen a lot of recent interest in the private sector emerging around carbon markets, and I think that's been driven by a range of business risks and opportunities that companies are beginning to see. They need to mitigate the environmental risks to their own businesses. They also might face physical risks from climate change, such as flooding, or perhaps more systemic risks from ecosystem degradation to their supply chains. But then some companies are investing for the opportunities, perhaps to improve their own corporate reputation, to improve their own branding. So, for example, we see water companies investing in peatland restoration for both of those reasons. They get clearer water if peat bogs are kept moist and sediment doesn't run off into their reservoirs, which all customers like. And it also reduces the water companies' filtering costs, and they're investing in restoration, which their investors as well as us as companies like. Back to you, Bridget.
Thanks, Hannah. A couple of slides back, you mentioned ecosystem services. So what exactly are these and why are they important?
Yeah, ecosystem services and ecosystem markets pay for the public goods that also could provide direct private benefit to investors. So let's visualize that water company example. Let's say a local scheme exists that invests in upland and upstream peatland restoration, which improves the water quality and then also reduces flood risks for both residents and businesses downstream. It also results in the water treatment costs going down for the water company and better quality water for the mussel farming company at the bottom of the downstream chain. Public goods, the peatland restoration, have resulted in public and private benefits. So in ecosystem markets, the private beneficiary, the water company, should pay for the peatland restoration. The mussel farmer should pay the sustainable agriculture farmer upstream for continuing to do those practices to ensure that pesticides don't end up in the water downstream and that stays pure. And we're working with policy makers in the public sector and with natural economy sector businesses to create the right balance and enable ecosystem markets to overcome the potential issues with ensuring that the value goes to the right place and is paid for by the right organisation. Our Thriving Natural Capital Challenge Centre has worked on projects where private sector companies and public bodies have come together to co-invest in ecosystem services and markets, for example, in landscape enterprise networks. LENS create regional ecosystem markets. Partnerships are created in geographical and sectoral settings. You can see where the 10 LENS labs are across the UK on the map shown in the green and grey circles, and we work with the LENS in southwest Scotland. But they all look at the landscape from the perspective of business need. What are the risks and opportunities that landscapes present to the local businesses, and therefore why should the businesses engage with regenerative projects in nature? And LENS helps businesses work together to influence the quality and performance of the landscapes in which they all operate, and farmers and landowners are valued business partners in those environments. So LENS really offers that way of funding a really broad range of ecosystem service interventions. LENS also separates out the payment for the primary products from the land, and then it creates a new market for the ecosystem services. And in southwest Scotland, I'll just explain how that works. We've got a major business, Nestlé, which needs the local land use to be dairy farming so that there's enough milk production to supply their local chocolate factory. Nestlé also pays for ecosystem services that local farmers additionally provide as a secondary product. Flood mitigation through hedgerow planting. So that secondary product gives the local community the positive environmental outcome, less flooding. Now, previously, businesses just paid for the milk, and the local community had to deal with the increased flood risk caused by farmers needing to maximise their land use for dairy farming for milk. And that situation isn't fair. The profit from the chocolate bars made with the milk produced in the landscape should come back to support local environmental outcomes, and LENS helps local supply chains in local areas achieve that. Back to you, Bridget.
Thanks, Hannah. So in that case, why do agriculture and natural economy businesses need to measure natural capital, and how do they do it? How do we do it?
Okay, so the ecosystem services arising from the restoration of natural capital are now increasingly being recognised as economic opportunities. They're monetisable. And that means that the finance sector is becoming involved. They want to invest in natural capital projects, which means that we as a sector need to measure their value, need to measure their starting point and where they get to. And let me just make a side point about why we need the finance sector involved. It's because we've got a funding gap between the current public spending commitments that we have in place. But if we were to meet the policy aims from land use for dealing with climate change and biodiversity loss, we've actually got a funding gap of about £20 billion here in Scotland. So we need that extra private investment to work with the public sector investment. Otherwise, the £20 billion that will be the cost of us achieving better environmental and biodiversity outcomes might be missed. Our targets might be missed because we don't have enough money in the purse. So that's why the finance sector has to be involved. But of course, they have expectations. They assume that the land and marine sectors work the same way that other sectors they're used to investing in do, like tech, like energy. And those sectors give the finance sector loads of data very regularly. Now, we know that thinking about our sector, the natural economy sector, isn't so set up to provide the level of data that a tech company could. The Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, the TNFD, which was set up by Mark Carney last year, has specifically asked for the data about natural assets to be what they call decision grade and asset level data, in order to facilitate their ability to be able to invest and their ability to be able to report back to investors. So if we're making a nature-based project that we want to attract private finance sector money to, we know that in return, investors will expect to see regular detailed data showing the improvement in the nature project through time, the nature assets through time. So last year, I worked with a nature regeneration project that has been thinking about what detailed data it could provide regularly to its investors. And we studied what asset level, landscape level data could be made available at a new Scottish restoration project on the Bunloit estate on the edge of Loch Ness. And it has secured private investment for the restoration of the estate. But what we did was study with the Bunloit's own ecologists and rangers novel digital data collection methods which we could use to establish a baseline data set of natural capital. And in particular, we focused on faunal animal biodiversity, which could be considered decision grade by their investors. So measuring a farm or estate's natural capital baseline is an important data set to have if we want to get investment into nature-based projects. And then what are we doing against that baseline? Future measuring to show improvement in the natural asset through time. And how is that created? Well, it's created by the investment in the regenerative activities that the financial sector is putting money up front for us to achieve those projects. So let's watch a clip from a video I made about collecting that baseline data on natural capital with digital traps, maps and apps at the Bunloit estate.
I'm with Craig, a local ecological consultant, and we're going to look at some of the digital devices that the estate is using to find out more about the habitats and fauna here. What is this, Craig?
Well, Hannah, we have a couple of camera traps, basically.
Okay.
We have a kind of standard camera trap that I think most people are probably familiar with, which is just a passive infrared triggered by motion and heat. And these have been set up across the estate in a kind of fixed network to basically record the larger fauna that's moving around the state, so the larger mammal species. And they've been set up in a number of locations and can be set up to record video, photos, at different rates and sensitivities, night and day, so we get a full picture of our daytime fauna and nocturnal fauna. So what you've got is the camera right at the top here. This is your infrared, so what some refer to as a black flash. So in the daytime you get a colour picture, just exposed for normal colour light, and then at night you get an infrared flash, so you end up with a black and white picture. But most of that is unperceptible to most animals, so it doesn't disturb them. And then you've got here right in the middle the motion sensor, and then if you unclip, you've kind of got your control panel and various settings, so you can program it to video, photo, change the resolution, change the interval between the captures. So depending on whether you're trying to do a generic survey or you want to target specific species, you can program that accordingly. So there's about 16 of those set up in fixed positions across the estate, and have been recording night and day for several weeks now.
And what powers it?
So it's powered by a series of AA batteries. Basically, we just have a little power bank in the bottom there, so we can put in 8 AA's. You can run standard, rechargeable, lithium. They don't work as well with rechargeable, which is the only annoyance with them. And they'll last arguably up to about 6 months, depending on the number of videos and photos, obviously, that they take.
Okay.
So yeah, really useful units that we can put out in remote areas.
Right. So that's the camera. Where's the trap?
So the trap, well, effectively that's a trap in itself in terms of
Okay.
things walking past it and recording. But where these are, the kind of weak point of these is if you're looking at the smaller fauna, the kind of wood mice, the shrews, that are arguably as important as the bigger species, the boar and the deer. These are excellent at capturing the big species. The smaller ones, they don't do so well. But principally what we've done is put a close focus lens. So this is a standard photo lens that you would screw on front of a regular camera. And what that does is reduces the focal length. So it enables the camera to focus on something that's much closer to it. These cameras aren't by default set up to do that. So all we've done is literally blue tack a close focus lens on, tape around the infrared flash just so we don't overexpose the image, otherwise there's too much light coming out at such a short distance. And then what that enables us to do is take pictures at a much closer range. The tricky bit obviously is making the animal sit
In front of the camera.
in the right spot in front of the camera.
Right.
So to do that, what we've done is take a box
Yep.
like that, and then
Yep.
the bungee, if you just strap that around the back and hook him on,
Brilliant.
that should stay put. And then what happens is we then put a little bit of seed bait in the front, and these have been cut to a distance that reflects the focal length of the lens that we've
Yep.
blue tacked to the front, so that any animal that now comes in to take that bait will be perfectly in focus. And therefore we can now get video and photos of all our small mammals, our shrews, our mice, our voles, our weasels. But we've also been finding we get a number of bird species. We still get the larger mammals. You'll still get a badger head or a pine marten that will come in and try and take the bait. But it gives us a whole new range of data on these smaller mammals that we were missing by just using the camera traps in their traditional way.
Craig, tell me about the app then that we're using to gather the data and track where the camera traps are.
So we've been using an app called Input, and with another colleague, fellow ecologist who's been working on the project. We've been putting an app together which effectively gives you a geographic information system on your phone, and it enables us to collect and record data, spatial data, in terms of locations and where we've set up camera traps and other survey equipment, onto a map on our phone, and then upload that via a cloud to a desktop GIS.
Okay. So what we're looking at here is a bird's eye view of the estate and its boundaries, and then these markers, CT14, CT06, that's going to be your classification of camera traps.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, they're the main camera traps that I refer to as using in a traditional way, that we've got this fixed network. As you can see, they're dotted all the way across the estate, across all the major habitat types. So we can go and locate those specific camera traps and navigate to them using the GPS on our phone. So it makes them really easy to find. We've also got, as you'll see, there's a number of orange dots. They refer to the small mammal camera traps. So again, we know exactly where all of those have been placed. So one, we can go and find them to check them, to service the batteries, change the memory cards. But equally, when we come to process the data, we want to know, well, where was that data actually recorded in the field? And we can go back to this information that we've generated via the app on our phone.
So you've set it up on the app. Can I get the app and be a ranger for the day, gathering data and sending it back to your central system?
Absolutely. Anyone can download the app. It's a publicly available app that a lot of people are using, and then they tailor it towards their specific needs. So we've been able to set up the rangers, ourselves, volunteers that we've had working on the project, and then they can access different data layers and be able to go out and collect specific field data and navigate to those locations all on their mobile phone.
Fantastic.
Hannah, that's you back sharing.
Thank you. All right then. So yeah, those digital camera traps like the ones we've just seen, and the mobile apps that we can use to create digital maps like the ones we've just seen, enable us to know exactly where we took the measurements, and then we can repeat that measurement this year and next year and begin to really extend the data set, showing those changes through time. The results from digital devices like camera traps were obviously the images, and that is really rich decision grade data. But also you could see from the camera traps, they were also giving us metadata, the data about the data. And you can just see that in the right-hand picture, the timestamp when the measurement was taken, the device's identity. And what we then worked out was that the data that we were gathering through the traps and through the apps and on the maps, together with their data, could be qualified as decision grade according to the finance sector's specification. And our latest co-authored paper with Bunloit has concluded that decision grade biodiversity data can be produced by practitioners like Craig at Bunloit with limited resources, their own phones with apps, and pretty cheap digital sensors like the camera trap. The one that we saw is about £170. That is enough to give the investors regular decision grade data. And Bunloit will invest in some restoration activity that the longer video tells you about. And I think Kirstine will put the link to that into the chat in case you want to see the complete story. But they'll use the traps, apps and maps to take those measurements again and again. Over to you, Bridget.
The digital applications that we've just spoken about, why is it so important that these are practical and trustable?
Okay, well, we saw, I'm going to answer the trustable one first and then the practical one. We saw that in the video that that sensor, it's not the only one on the market. There are other ones, and other estates, other farmers will use different ones. All of these apps, all of these traps and devices are made by different manufacturers, and the different manufacturers have different processes and different apps, and it's neither transparent or interoperable, and that's not very trustable. It's fine for Bunloit. Bunloit can see their own data, but if a government body needed to check it, or if we wanted to share it, or if we wanted to compare it against some data from somewhere else, we can't do that. These closed manufacturer stacks don't enable that. So that's why I've set up Trustable Credit. It's a research and development project to co-develop and begin to publish standardized processes covering that data journey from devices on the farm or the estate to the finance sector. So if the data is the same measurements, if it's gathered and analysed in the same way, it's then more interoperable, it's more trustable. So that's also a great reason for the project. Another is about ensuring data security, better data security, cybersecurity of devices like the digital camera traps. We need to know that they are who they say they are and that they're authenticated, calibrated, operating correctly in the place that they say they are, and there aren't any standardized processes for that either, due to the different manufacturers stipulating different ways of gathering that data. So the data has to be trustable because it's comparable, and if that's the case, then the finance sector can better accept it. So do check out trustablecredit.com as we work towards creating those international open standardized processes. It's also important for the applications to be practical and usable. The traps, maps and apps deployed at Bunloit, a proven digital way to measure natural capital. Craig worked out that in person, if he was doing all that live trapping across the estate, it would have required about 400 hours of his manual work, whereas in contrast, the 12 digital camera traps that were deployed were installed in one day, and they were moved across 12 different habitats and checked every 3 days, and he estimated that that was approximately about 90 hours of field time spent by him. So that's a saving of 3/4 of his time. The other time and cost saving comes at the point of data processing. Much of the data captured live trapping in the field requires a human on site to go and see the animal, report on it, classify it, write it up. Whereas with the digital camera trap, we had images and videos, which were then classified for free by citizen scientists using an app called Nature Spy. So the final part of the data journey is when it goes between organisations. So when it has to go from the estate to government to financial organisations. And the World Bank and WWF have both called for nature set governors to be public sector bodies rather than private sector data businesses. And I actually work as an advisor to an organisation called Agrometrics, and they're a data institution that is championing open data. They steward data on behalf of others with public value aims at their core and govern who has access to that data. So they could add a further enhancement of trustability and transparency to data journeys. Thanks, Bridget.
And Hannah, looking to the future, one final question from us before we move on to the Q&A from the audience. How will you continue to make an impact with this?
Yeah, I think through the Thriving Natural Capital Challenge Centre at SRUC with my co-director, Mark Reed, we're working on projects such as new carbon codes that will help organise the voluntary carbon market better so that natural capital and ecosystem market projects work properly and fairly. We're working on projects with the public sector and discussing how natural capital projects should be assessed to enable regions or informal bioregions, right down to individual farm businesses to be able to build better business models for natural capital and ecosystem market projects. And do check out our webpage for podcasts, videos and news articles about that. And then finally, I'm part of a big festival launching next month, the Dandelion Festival. SRUC is the growing and science partner of a huge harvest festival happening across Scotland this year, and it launches next month in April. We can't wait to welcome you all to that. It's a really ambitious, creative and scientific program demonstrating the power of collective action, and it's about inspiring a grow your own initiative for modern times. And we're really trying to blend science, technology, engineering, maths together with art so that we can compel and inspire more people to join in. Very quickly, I'm leading a digitally enabled project where children in 100 secondary schools are going to be using an app that we've designed to enable them to become citizen scientists, to compare future farming techniques like this growing cube that we can see on the image with traditional growing methods like outside or in pots on the windowsills. We're going to be using Internet of Things sensors with the students as well. They'll place these in the cubes and they'll give some automatic readings, but the students will also collect manual data readings and input those into the app. And then the app dashboards will enable clusters of schools to work together to compare or to compete. And Scotland as a nation will be able to peek in and see how the young citizen scientists are getting on. So we're really excited to be a part of it. Please visit dandelion.scot to sign up to the newsletter and social media channels and to get involved. And I think I better stop there. Thank you very much for listening. These are my contact details and you can find me on LinkedIn too.
Thanks, Hannah. I think that was a really uplifting way to end the presentation. And I think having come from a background of student recruitment as well, I think involvement with the schools, interacting with schools is such an important thing in the industry to get the kids involved and talking about it and actually getting excited about the rural sector. So that's a great way to end the presentation. So we're now going to move on to questions from the audience, Hannah. We've got 4 questions come in, and the first one is from Damson. And Damson is asking, do you see larger companies using non-renewable resources such as coal or oil being required to reinvest in restoration in the future?
Will it be made regulatory rather than just voluntary? I think as we go on and we get closer to the 2045 target of Scotland saying it's going to be net zero by then, I think we could well see more regulatory drivers, but at the moment it is voluntary.
Thank you, Hannah. The next question is, the digital camera trap was great. What other quirky apps have you seen that are helping to measure natural capital?
Okay, so if you watch the full story at Bunloit, we used a sensor that was a bat echo meter, and it is just a small addition that goes into an iPhone or an iPad, and then you walk around with it because obviously it's difficult to see bats. You can't hear them, it's ultrasonic, but this widget picks up those bat signals and enables the bat species to be recognized by an app that sits on the digital phone or tablet that you're using to collect the information. Another sensor like that is called an audio moth, and that collects sounds from birds as well as from bats, and links to a kind of artificial information system. So it's recognizing the sound waves of these different animals and beginning to say, okay, in the last 20 hours, I have heard that woodpecker, that bat, and giving us a record of those things. So yeah, there are definitely some very exciting sensors and apps emerging.
Fantastic, very interesting. The next question is, what do governments do or need to do to encourage business to pay fairly for natural assets?
Yeah, I think they need to support more schemes like Lens to get started in different places. When they're there, businesses really engage. If you think about that story of Nestle in southwest Scotland, lots of organisations came forward as soon as one of the leading businesses stepped up and said, we're going to do this, because it just makes sense for everybody. It makes sense to invest in the public ecosystem service or the public natural capital, because it's benefiting your business too. You're reducing the flood risk for your business as well as for the local community. So the government needs to kick off more projects like Lens. It needs to provide the seed finance for more of these different ways of regenerating natural capital, and then business needs to come in behind.
Thank you, Hannah. Interesting question here. Are there similar projects or work being undertaken elsewhere in the world? Are there any in third world countries, for example?
Yes, and probably more, because certainly, you know, for a long time, rainforests and mangroves, which are kind of like blue carbon projects, have been going, and the sectors that have had to buy carbon credits have been buying them from projects that have come from areas like the rainforest or the mangroves. So they've been going longer, and then companies that have to engage in carbon markets because they have to do it to be compliant with government have bought into those projects. So yes, lots more in developing nations. The airlines, for example, have to buy carbon credits, and they often come from great projects in other nations.
Fantastic. So we're changing altogether here. One of the attendees is saying they would love to know more about the vertical farms. They actually look fascinating.
Great. Well, I have done an episode of what is called Shruck Bites. It's a tech training series that just is 20 minutes worth of content that anyone can enjoy. So I've done one about what's called total controlled environment agriculture officially, and we all know them as vertical farms. But that's an episode that someone will find the link to and put in the chat. And otherwise, if you want to know more about vertical farms, do join in with the Dandelion Festival, because the vertical farms are going to be a key part, not just of the school's work, but of the artistic opportunities and community opportunities and growing opportunities that are going to open up across Scotland as well. So dandelion.scot as well.
Okay, perhaps that we can pop these links into the chat for everybody to get as well. We've got one question left. If anybody else has got any questions that they want to ask, pop them in the chat now. The final question is from Mess Fisher-Muller, and Mess is asking, what other types of ecosystem services can we monitor and thus capitalise? And can we get consumers to pay for these ecosystem services? Do we have to rely on financial institutions buying offsets?
Thanks, Maz. That's a typical academics question with at least 28 parts to it. So, Bridget, can you remind me of the first part?
The first part is, what other types of ecosystem services can we monitor and thus capitalise?
Yeah. It's easy to, it's kind of easiest to measure biodiversity because all you have to do is count a species type, but we can monitor carbon sequestration as well. And we're just beginning to think about how we use things like drone imagery or LiDAR images and satellite images to help us measure things like the canopy of forests. And then if we know that, then we can probably work out how much a forest of a certain canopy size is sequestering. So there are already kind of methods for doing that, and carbon sequestration projects that have been going on for a number of years using things like the Woodland Carbon Code. Do that measurement at the moment through forgotten the word. Sorry. They do it through like applying it through a spreadsheet, but what we're beginning to work out is that we can do it through using digital tools to make an actual measurement. Right, that's that bit. And inference, that's the word I was looking for. What's the second part of that question from us?
The second part is, and can we get consumers to pay for these ecosystem services? We have to rely on financial institutions to buy offsets.
Yeah, we don't have to rely on the financial services to step in there. I think ecosystem services are more likely to get going in the environments like those local ones we were talking about, like with Lens, where a business steps up to be an organization that says, okay, let's make sense of the ecosystem services in our landscapes. And we've also come across new models where community development trusts work together with businesses in their area. We have just made a podcast about bioregioning Tayside, where a bioregion, a region that is based around the sort of geology locally rather than a boundary, has developed methods for doing ecosystem services together. And then finally, we've just done a piece of research for Scottish Government on regional land use partnerships. So again, this is thinking about the areas that do have official county borders or town borders, and how areas like that could begin to work together to make business cases for ecosystem markets. And the beginning part of making those business models is to measure the natural capital. So we've also been recommending about how you can measure to in order for those business models to then follow on.
Thanks, Hannah. A couple of more questions have come in. The next one is, could you tell us please about some of your work on human trust in the reporting of food quality and the supply chain?
On human trust and food quality in the supply chain.
human trust in the reporting of food quality and the supply chain?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, we did some work where we used distributed ledger technology or blockchain technology as a new kind of, that's a new technology that sort of has better trust and transparency inbuilt into it. And we looked at a kind of way of ensuring that oats that said they were gluten-free were actually gluten-free, so that people who were celiac sufferers could actually have them. So that meant we needed to track the product from before it had gone into the field, so when it was still a grain, right through to the point where it was in a shop, and track that supply chain and then provide evidence of that supply chain from that point of seed right through to product. And again, there's an SRUC Bites episode about that, and a longer course on that that probably someone can find and put in the chat too.
Thanks, Hannah. And I'm just looking at the time. I think this will be our last question now. We're getting towards the hour. What work is being done to measure and monitor the natural capital in farm soils? Will the soil carbon code address this?
Yeah, so we've just started work on a UK farm soil carbon code. We've done all of the initial research to review what has been done around the world in carbon codes that have worked in other countries. And we're just working out what we're just about to publish what we think the results are, and what is possible, and what is a good set of principles and criteria for a UK code. And there's also a website for that, which someone might put into the chat as well, where you can sign up to go on that journey with us and find out more.
Okay, Hannah, I think that's put you through your paces. We've had quite a lot of fantastic questions from the audience tonight. So we'll close the questions and answers now. And that just leaves me to thank Hannah for her fantastic and really informative presentation. So thank you so much, Hannah, and on behalf of myself, the advancement team and the audience tonight. And I'm sure I'm not alone in saying that we've learned a lot tonight about thriving natural capital and the importance and benefits of the measurement of it to our natural economy. So thank you very much to the audience. Thanks for all the questions. And again, just to let you know that we have recorded, and we will be popping the recording on YouTube by the end of the week. So that just leaves me to say goodbye. Again, thanks to Hannah, and to wish you all a very good evening, and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.